Okay, well, I can welcome Peter Lee. Peter Lee is the Corporate Vice President, Research and Incubations at Microsoft, who is joining us online this afternoon. Hi, welcome, Peter.
Hi, thank you. I'm really so pleased and honored. I'm speaking to you from the Pacific Northwest in the U.S., from my home in Kirkland, Washington. So thank you for having me here. I'm really honored, to be asked to contribute to such meaningful conversations, and in particular about the role of scientific research in addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges, and of course the pandemic counts amongst them. I Just to say a little bit about myself and my role, I'm a scientist at heart, and as the head of Microsoft Research and Incubations, I, of course, focus a lot of my energy on understanding computing technology and its impact on people and the world. And on this point, as you had explained, I lead an organization called Microsoft Research that this month is actually celebrating its 30th anniversary. As you had explained, we are a system of research labs around the world. In fact, just last month, we opened our newest laboratory in Amsterdam, our 9th lab. And these labs around the world house 1,500 research staff engaged in the discovery and development of new knowledge, particularly in computing and related fields, the development of new technologies, much of which is transitioned into Microsoft products and services. And we engage in what we refer to as relevant moonshots, such as new undersea data center concepts in order to eliminate the environmental impact of large-scale computing. In Microsoft Research, we also engage with the academic research community. We publish all of our work openly. We collaborate with both academic and industrial organizations. But as an industrial research lab, we, of course, are also motivated to do what we can to advance the mission of Microsoft. And that mission is stated as to empower all people and organizations on the planet to achieve more. And when you double click on that mission, it essentially obligates us within Microsoft Research to situate our work in the real world. And one of the ways that we do that is to frame our work around the thought process. We think about what will be inevitably true about the future. If we pick a point, let's say 10 years from today, we try to imagine what do we think will absolutely, definitely be true about the world, that world 10 years from now. And based on that inevitable truth, then we try to work backwards from there and see what should we be thinking about and working on today. So, for example, in the field of healthcare, if we imagine looking at the aging demographics in North America, in Europe, in most parts of Asia, it's easy to predict and see as inevitable a dramatic rise in age-related neurological disease emerging. And from that, in fact, in that same time period, the reduction of many, if not most, cancers to being a manageable disease. And that's a significant shift over this decade because in many parts of the world, including in the US and in Europe, the bulk of medical research funding today is devoted to cancer research. But we can imagine 10 years from now the inevitability that neurological disease research will be significant, in fact, maybe even more significant than cancer research in terms of funding. And so that inevitability then helps us work out decisions about what we should be working on today. Now, increasingly, I find myself thinking about how we approach the process of research, how we do scientific discovery and why. And what we've been experiencing over the past year has, in essence, uncovered the fragility of our society and of the planet itself. And it hasn't been just COVID-19, but also climate catastrophes, such as the major wildfires in Australia and California and other parts of the world, attacks on foundational technologies that underpin democracy, such as cyber intrusions on voting machines, mistrust of news online, the spread of misinformation, and many others. And through these crises, what I saw within Microsoft Research, but not only within our own research organizations, but research organizations around the world, was researchers stepping forward with their capabilities to attack problems that were critical for crisis response and recovery. And essentially what we're seeing is that scientists and researchers are being pulled into crisis response scenarios and situations that threaten the existence of individuals, of communities, and of whole societies. Now, this is important observation because the normal paradigm of scientific discovery is that we work on problems, we publish papers, meet at conferences, we engage in debate. And through that process, scientists around the world work on things, replicate the results, and over the course of time, oftentimes, for example, in medical research, over the course of 5 to 10 years, scientific consensus emerges. But what we saw in the pandemic is in crisis response, this was all accelerated. We need to do 10 years of work in just 1 year. And since a global crisis like COVID-19 has the power to bring down power structures, really to bring down whole governments, that scientific process happened under intense public scrutiny, with the public watching and ultimately engaging collaboratively in the process of research. In other words, more than ever, the world got involved in the sausage making that is the scientific discovery process. Now, for me, within Microsoft Research, what I was finding is that some of our people were in fact spending full time in this sort of crisis response mode. And, in a way, it started to make sense to me. If an asteroid with the power to destroy life on the planet were to head our way, who would you call? Scientists, of course, would be part of that crisis response. And ultimately, I concluded that a new paradigm, which I've been referring to as crisis response science, a science to enable society to be more resilient, was emerging. Indeed, I think we are witnessing a new academic discipline, much like we saw the emergence of bioethics in the 20th century, as researchers and philosophers began to understand the potentially existential impact on people, communities, and humanities of emerging concepts such as genetic engineering, animal testing, and so on. I believe we may be in the midst of the emergence of a new academic discipline of, for lack of a better term, crisis response science, or the study of societal resilience. And like the emergence of new academic disciplines such as bioethics, the science for crisis response will likely rely heavily on both the hard sciences and the social sciences coming together. Now, in the case of societal resilience, the first task is, of course, to understand what does it mean, and how do we actually define and form such a discipline. We've been imagining that this is really the study of capacity building for anticipating, absorbing, and adapting to disruptions. It requires the worldwide scientific community to come together and understand what it means to be more resilient, how to respond, and how to build to a better future. Now, we've been learning a lot really from our response to the pandemic. We had to recognize that there are common challenges across crises, particularly around data, in order to apply new and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. We needed to move away from technology solutions that are built for a singular purpose, but towards composable technologies that can be deployed rapidly and reused at scale. we've also seen the importance of building collaborations, sometimes uncommon collaborations across boundaries. And in fact, during the pandemic, we had an unprecedented amount of open data sharing amongst institutions and organizations that normally would either be very protective of their data sets or be siloed apart from each other. And we saw the need to engage as first-class citizens, leaders at the grassroots in communities, and have them engaged as first-class partners, not only as activists in bringing new technologies and new technical solutions into the real world, but actually contributing to the process of scientific discovery itself. Now, of particular interest here, early on in the pandemic, there was a fundamental challenge in the intensity of public scrutiny and political pressure around the process of research. One of the fundamental things that happened early on, of course, was the rapid development and deployment of therapeutics to help people who became sick with COVID-19. And before there was really widespread availability of monoclonal antibody infusion therapies or of antivirals such as remdesivir, one of the early therapeutic solutions was convalescent plasma. And so a coalition of public-private community organizations that included great medical organizations such as the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins University, healthcare organizations such as LabCorp, Anthem, tech companies like ours at Microsoft, MITRE, Uber, and others, major foundations such as the Lasker Foundation and the Gates Foundation, and many other organizations came together to form a coalition called The Fight Is In Us to scale the use of convalescent plasma to treat COVID-19. A major awareness campaign was launched and a direct engagement with the US government response through the White House Coronavirus Task Force was formed. And a tremendous amount was accomplished, but at the same time, the intense public interest and public scrutiny meant that the process of understanding the safety and efficacy of convalescent plasma became not just a scientific matter, but a very public matter and a political matter. And so managing the process of scientific discovery and doing it correctly and doing it well in such a setting is another thing that we learned marks this idea of crisis response science. Most important, though, even more important than the management of that kind of public and political scrutiny, was community empowerment. During the pandemic, it became clear the role of community-based organizations in providing critical support and services. And of course, it could be things that you might expect through food support or vaccine drives, but it also ended up having grassroots community leaders contributing directly to the scientific research itself. Marginalized communities are often those that are most impacted during times of crises in which disparities can widen. And it's for this reason that re-examining the social contracts between people, communities, and institutions to build trust, understand their true needs, and contribute to new knowledge ends up being so important when we think about societal resilience. We, from this, rethink how we develop technology solutions and form a process of co-development and co-innovation that reaches and adapts with communities over time. The increase in frequency and severity of crises, such as COVID-19, such as climate catastrophes, and many others, has shown us the need to take a new approach to societal problem solving, where we need to break down traditional barriers and bring together diverse minds to create technology solutions that are more adaptable, inclusive, and help us make better decisions. It has not been an easy time, but I am very optimistic for the future that as we bring together people, adaptable technologies, and community leaders, that will be more resilient to future pandemics and future crises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really inspiring and great, and I especially love that point towards the end about the grassroots influencing institutions and technology, and I really love that as a model for going forward with the climate crisis. We are open to questions now, so if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand in the audience. Do I see any hands? Okay, well, I had a question. During the pandemic, you mentioned that one of the things that we saw was data sets being opened and shared amongst companies and things. And this is something that I think is a challenge across many aspects when it comes to AI, supply chain, et cetera. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience? Was there a fallout from sharing data, or do you think this is something that is going to inspire more people to be open to sharing data in the future?
I think I think that the normal concerns about data sharing, especially early in the pandemic response, were put aside. And what we have learned through doing that is oftentimes there's a long-term benefit that wasn't realized. To take one specific example, a biotech company that Microsoft works closely with, Adaptive Biotechnologies in Seattle, they develop diagnostics, blood-based diagnostics that involve genetic analysis of the immune system, human immune system. And in fact, it's a particular genetic analysis of T-cell receptors. And their business has normally focused very much on a small set of infectious diseases and cancers in order to develop ways to, say, titrate chemotherapies or to do early diagnosis of infectious diseases such as Lyme disease. When the pandemic arose, they made the decision to shift their attention entirely to COVID-19. And the genetic signatures, the T-cell receptor genetic signatures of COVID-19, they made a decision to just publish openly to the scientific community. And for a small emerging biotech company, that would normally have been considered just an intense violation of their own intellectual property protections and a real threat. But what it did instead was it opened up new collaborative opportunities for that company with really a very wide range of organizations, not only other biopharma companies and some substantially important ones, but also organizations like LabCorp with major medical institutions such as the Institute for Systems Biology at the Providence Health System and others. And it has, in time, actually advanced their business prospects. And that's a pattern that we ended up seeing over and over again. And so I think we're learning something new, that when you're able to situate the data sharing in a very focused, targeted way, a way that really addresses directly a specific crisis, it not only is the right thing in that crisis response, but the focus ends up creating a stronger system and new business opportunities for the organizations involved.
Yes, I absolutely agree that there's huge opportunity there when we can come together, and that's really inspiring to hear your thoughts on that. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today. It was great to hear your thoughts.
Thank you.